Welcome everyone to witness launch of world's largest innovation campus. A founder is someone who turns an idea into a business and a CEO is someone who manages that business operations. A founder can also transform into a CEO, but how exactly can a founder become a CEO? And what is the difference? We have Mr. Ramakant Sharma, founder and COO at Livspace to give us more insight into this. So, I
Thank
would
you.
like to take over.
Thanks, everyone. I'm Ramakant. Am I audible? Thank you. Topic foundation, CEO transition. I think the idea of transitioning a founder to CEO, or maybe not necessarily a transition. There's a CEO and there's a founder. So I think personally, I haven't experienced this journey yet, but little bit early thoughts, how these two things are different, what is probably going to be a transition phase, and organizations scales and things change with time. So I'll cover some of those things, which I think might make a little bit sense to this set of audience. So this is transition from a founder to CEO. And what essentially this means, next slide. Yeah. So, so first of all, why to transition? Is there any expiry to a founder or some other reasons, lack of skill or an age? Why somebody thinks to transition and retire? Something which apparently has worked well, because the founder has actually created the business, and the reason the topic is being discussed is because something has really worked well, and that is something which actually created a, a phenomenal outcome from nothing. But all of a sudden, we have started discussing the transitioning the same person. So I think there is a expiry date. I don't think so. And why and when there is a founder to CEO transition, there's no clear answer. But there is somewhere, I think, it's a self call, and a call is more towards becoming a creator to an architect, which essentially means you are a coach to, in the sports analogy, a player, or in business, more relevant will be your business architect than a business creator. What that essentially means, I'm essentially not creating the things on the ground, but at the same time, spending lots of time on architecting the vision, culture, future, and that's something which is needed because these are two different jobs. At one point of time, the creating job in itself becomes huge. And sometimes you don't get enough time and bandwidth to think about architecting the future or leaving the legacy. So I think that's the reason, probably not the expiry, not the age, unless until some disease or something comes in. That's the fundamental reason this topic exists. And this thing exists in my opinion. So maybe we can move to, and this is, yeah, previous slide. So this is what happens. A founder thought to sell books online, but a CEO created a system which produces more revenue and profits from a software company than an e-commerce transaction. That's Amazon's story. And sells literally anything. So when founder planned an e-commerce company, there was no intent of creating AWS, which is primarily the value of Amazon today. Jeff Bezos wanted to build world's largest e-commerce book selling company to begin with, and then an e-commerce company. But Amazon's primarily value is this ecosystem. They are big in cloud, payment, software. It's a software company. So I think this is something which is a CEO-driven structure. Yeah, next slide. So, so what are the things which actually founders has to do? So getting the business started, obviously, that's a starting point. Develop a workable model, at least a plan for business, like this is what a founder wants to do. Hire a capable team, not necessarily a very good team. Because the definition of good team is also changes. It's good for you doesn't mean an absolute good. It's a capable team, build a company, little bit outline the framework and policies like this is wrong and this is right. But these policies are not exhaustive to multiple stakeholders. Create some degree of vision and arrange some resources, including finance, to start a business. This is actually the start of the business. And taking this business to a meaningful product market fit, consumers are buying, there's a couple of cycles have been completed, probably a decent sized business. Let's take a unicorn for an example. Then there is a second set of problems. Once you reach there, you need to start thinking what is your next quarter or next 2 quarters or next 2 years. Founders might not be worrying a quarter over quarter. Founder is a creator. He's fundamentally creating these things. Then there is the organization operations. Somebody is looking for a professional system, appraisals. At this point of time, I think the culture becomes much more important. And overseeing of the C-suite executives, because the work by definition has increased. And you slowly start becoming an architect, not creators. And the C-suite executives are the creators, but you need to have those guys. And these are actually the responsible CXOs. And you start acting more of face of a company than actually the doer on the ground. You need to tell others about the business, what you are building, and slowly it transitions to a business. So basically, back, yeah. So it's a founder's responsibility in my mind. Somewhere they need to transfer the thoughts, ideology, vision, mission, principles to an employee and an organization. Which essentially means sometimes they are great founders, but they are not able to translate the same to many stakeholders. I'll come to that. Employees are not the only stakeholders. Probably in initial days, people think my employee. That's only 10% done. That culture has to be passed to, yeah, so mental models to this, and you can move to next. So I'll not jump. So this one more slide. Here, yeah. Forward. So some of the models, and this is Pete Flint's framework, is 2 times unicorn founder. He is a little bit organized the framework. I'm using the same. So some of the things, but I think the mental model rolls around these 5 things. Founder always thinks, what are the KPIs? What are the things which I should be monitoring? What are the things which I should be really controlling? And they end up controlling multiple things. Actually, almost 90% of things happens in organizations. They know what is happening. CEOs need to let go most of the KPIs. This is counterintuitive, but that is true. KPIs has to be owned by CXOs. Founders has to worry only for one North Star metric. The metric in case of Amazon was consumer experience. There was losses, there was P&L pressure, there's so many things happens in an organization that as a founder who is worried about everything. But the moment he becomes CEO, he was only worried about consumer experience actually for multiple years and taken up. If everything goes wrong, he's not fine with, but he's okay with, but the consumer experience cannot go wrong. As long as that is intact, the company is still exists. That was the founder's job, rest is CXOs. So I think the second mental model is, you can move this slide, team to stakeholders. when a company starts, I think too much focus on team. My team is good, I'll build good team. This person will do this, I'll hire best. But actually the definition of team itself changes. The first extension outside your team becomes your first customer. A customer is team. You need to move from team to stakeholders. Do you really select customers, give equal emphasis on customers, get customer feedback, talk to them, meet them, understand their pain points? After customers, sometimes if investors like your business, investors also become stakeholders because they put in money. They start managing your investors. This is employees, customers, investors. Then you have lots of vendors working for you, suppliers, the ecosystem, and then eventually it's a government, society, all becomes a larger part of a matured business that is a stakeholder. The founders are generally not worried on the at least 7, 8 out of 7, 8 stakeholders more than 2. But CEO has to worry for all 8 and and really manage it well. In fact, at one point of time, the biggest job and responsibility for CEOs is stakeholder management. The third mental model, so if you keep thinking that now on I am just worrying for one thing for my company, then your company is transitioning and hence you. Its stakeholders are diversifying. Similarly, advice to peer advice. Generally the founders, and that's probably a very personal thought, are hustlers, little bit self-believers, and they rely on advice which is either self-learned and learned very closely within their own network. Like maybe parents and friends, and somebody who's very close to them, and their source of learning has been their own experiences. But that has to transition to a peer advice. If something you feel, if not exactly felt through by your peers and colleagues, I think you'll lose lots of energy convincing those, translating things, and running a large organization. So at this point of time, it's a reverse way. You cannot really impose everything to leadership. The peer advice means the advice you used to get, you need to little bit put it on the back burner and start receiving the feedback from your peers and the senior leaders and let them really allow to grow, prosperous, and take your job. And it is a vicious cycle because you hire smart people and do not take their advice, they leave. So it's actually the death trajectory also. So I think at some point of time, either you take a call that I'll run the company, or I'll really respect the opinions, thoughts, data points, advice from the peers. Because the best peers will not remain with you if the system doesn't work. Then I think the delegation. And delegation is very different thing, but I'll make 2 points on delegation. One is delegation because you can't handle everything. You've played multiple hats and it's a organization simply has grown. But in many cases, it is not about handling. It's more about bringing the expert on those minor functions. So a founder probably knows a little bit HR, little bit legal, little bit this and that. But it has a need of making those functions more specialized in nature. That's the number one reason. The number two, which is a more psychological and emotional learning in this process is, whoever you are going to delegate any work, first assumption is that the person will do almost 70% of good as good as you could have done. The moment you're delegating to an expert, but outcome is going to be 70% of what, even if you are not an expert at it, because you are at a different knowledge base, different energy, different reasons to survive. So anybody you're going to give work, if that person does more than 70% of the the desired output. I think the delegation was done in a right way. And let's wait, give time for that person 70% to become 100. So, so every delegation comes with a downfall on the efficiency. So it cannot be done with a P&L optimization, same efficiency. You might have done the same work on a phone call. A new sales head might take a week on this. And last is a organic trust versus deliberate trust building. Founders generally have a organic trust. Organic trust means the people who worked with you in early stage, the vendors, like when we started the company, I asked somebody to make a first couch. He said, why? Our MOQs is this, who are you? Why I'll make for you? They ask quantity. No vendor, basically you're starting from zero. So why somebody will leave a job and join you as a team member? Why somebody will start becoming a vendor for you? In fact, why somebody will rent you an office? Because they don't know you might go bankrupt in 6 months. So there are multiple problems, but founders naturally bring a organic trust, which means it is a trust both were delivered. Generally they, and this is the observation, might vary, attend their early colleagues, birthday parties, bursaries, sometimes invite them lunch, dinner, sending personal messages on various occasions. So it's a very organic trust, it's a both way connection. And that really becomes a backbone of the business. But the same thing doesn't work when it is a company. There you need to deliberately build the trust. Deliberate trust building cannot happen on attending the events. If somebody wants to, lend money, you give, like this is my friend and I have 10,000 rupees to give, I'll help. So this is both way help and a very cordial system built on early stage. But at a large scale company, the only trust deliberation can happen, probably the biggest metric out there is the transparency. And really transparency in terms of ethics and business both. You're transparent to the point that you have communicated what you're supposed to communicate as is your leadership. So it should not come back as something which is hitting the culture of the company. I think people are generally smart and they believe the leader, the biggest reason for believing a leader is transparency. And second biggest, and I'm saying the second biggest, some people say it's the biggest, is whatever you have promised, you should not really roll back on that promise. But even in certain cases you have rolled back, people still didn't lose the trust. The biggest reason of trust losing has been observed as a transparency. On communication, like business is not doing good, you're telling it's doing good, telling something which is not really in line with what's the reality. So I think these 5 parameters, and any one of these can answer the question 1. Like if you're thinking, I should not be worried on KPIs, I should be worried only one thing. My role has become bigger than my team to my stakeholders. The advice I used to get from college friends, parents, and close friends is no longer scalable. I need really a scalable peer advice. So probably 3 out of these 5, if already started sticking in your mind, you're transitioning to a CEO. So that's, I think, and this is a framework I borrowed from Pete Flint. He's 2 times unicorn founder. I wrote it multiple places. So yeah, maybe next slide. But then this is a couple of things. So I think the selection and transition becomes really, really critical. It might take years of planning. It's not, one-step process. It's a multi-step process. You groom someone, you meet someone. Out of 5 mental models, you pick 1, then you pick 2, 3, and slowly transition the organization. But taking a bet on a person which is not really a culture fit is an organ rejection kind of a problem. It's a complete surgery. Because you become a CEO, you're not that guy, then probably it's a big failure. So it needs lots of planning, transparency, and patience. And I think there's this 4th point, which is important. people take all eggs in one basket. You start relying on one person as a CEO because that's the person you are grooming. And if that situation reaches to organ failure, the organization, as I was saying, 2-3 years behind in the cycle. So you always have a contingency plan. Build 3-4 people simultaneously to that role. This also has a negative because there will be competition, but I think some contingency plan to the process is needed. And I think that's pretty much this. And in the end, I'll say it is painful, but next slide. It's definitely a rewarding and a lifetime experience. Why? Because this doesn't really gets your founder as a retire. It gets you more work and more thinking. You become an architect. You can think of a vision. You can think of a future. And it doesn't stop founders doing what they're good at. For instance, they should never stop. The company exists because you had certain things good in you. So those things like maybe the sense on people were very strong, which a professionally developed team might not have. The sense on consumer readings were very strong. That means you continue reading consumers. So I think this really doesn't lead any of the work you're good at to stop. Secondly, it allows you to become a book selling company to Amazon because you get a little bit more strategic thought, time, and you do that not as a part-time thing. You become a full-time doer of that. You're understanding your consumers, you're understanding your stakeholders, you're taking peer advice, all the 5 things on the bottom. Probably the organization is going to multiply from there. So this is actually not a transition or a retirement. So I think the title given transition, it is not transition. It is something which is scaling the business, and the only way to scale is probably this. I think that's my last slide. And any question, anything?
In this transition, very often the founders have a lot of control when they are not really funded and all, and in the process when they get funded, they may be the CEO, but in terms of stake in the company, they may actually have very little, and therefore their decisions also may not be what they were taking earlier when they were fully in control. So how do they take this transition, which we say like you were the king earlier, now you're rich but you're not the king?
So I great question. So my sense on this is, see, again I said this is more, the framework is more in the dimension of creator versus architect. So this actually anybody can be a creator, whether you own less equity or more. And anybody can be an architect. Architects are sometimes the Google hired Eric Schmidt to really made it business. Otherwise, it was an expensive hobby of Larry Page. So basically, crawling search pages was not a business, but it was a fantastic technology. So sometimes I think the reason to work is more I enjoy architecting the business. If your control is the reason, probably, as I said, the transition itself is a decontrolling. It's a decentralization of the business. So control by virtue of work or by virtue of equity. I think this is more about control by virtue of plan and work. You are the architect of the business. But exercising a legal power, sometimes neither the creator nor the architect. For that point, I can argue both might not have the control, financial control of the business. It might be owned by some large bank. So ownership is very different from, I think, the CEO and the architect. CEO and architects are two mind frames. And the financial control is very important but tangential to that. Anybody can have a financial control, and both architects and creators might be chains removed. But the call is whether certain time frame a person wants to be an architect or a creator. I think the creator transition to architect is a natural progression, and that will create much more value for overall stakeholders. So the financial controller out there will be beneficial with the transition.
So that is if the financial controllers are allowing him to architect it.
As I was saying, it is for their benefit. If they are not, probably the company will become more like a single person controlled company, which might not be able to create as value as Amazon did. So I think this transition is more natural in favor of a stakeholder management. In fact, shareholders I counted within the constituents of the, like, I started with team, then customer, then shareholder, then vendors, then government and society. So these are stakeholders in the process. And for the CEOs generally are able to create much more shareholder wealth than actually individual promoters. So it is good for actually the financial investors. See, my view might be different, but I think founding team, whether it's a one person or more than one person, both have a good success. Jeff Bezos is one person, Larry Page and Eric Siemens, Sergey Brin are two founders. In India, many companies are one founder successful too. I think this topic still applies to both the founders if they are two or a one, because both of them have certain instincts. That's why they are founders. But founders becoming a CEO might need a learning, or in some cases less learning, in some cases more. But it really doesn't matter whether it's a 1% or two. Personal advice and practical advice, it's always good to start with two people. The reason being, first of all, all of us are human beings. So you might, fall sick, something happening in your family. The businesses should not be hampered because you are not available. That's such a basic principle. Like, and in a year, might be a chance that you might not be available for 10% of the time. That's the one. Second, if you got a true partner, which is, I think, the important, you have so many things to discuss, brainstorm, because mostly questions are unknown and answers are definitely unknown. So you'll come across a journey which, you might need some sounding board, something to be discussed, something actually, and it's not the sounding board you don't have in your friend circle, but then your friend has to be informed as much as your co-founder is. You need to, then he or she is acting as a sounding board for you. But sometimes the internal persons are much more informed, they understand the 360 view of the situation, and they can genuinely help you navigate a decision. So I think my view is more biased towards more than one founder. And this is again not ownership, as I said. There is more ownership will be obviously half reduced, right? But I think the more important is you'll probably grow the pie proportionally. Yeah. It's a great question. So I see, first of all, I think the company should reflect a true P&L when they report. And true P&L means you are a cost. Whether you are a founder, you didn't come free. So if you are not reporting your cost, you are over reporting profit or less reporting the losses. So I think that nobody is free. So there is a cost to everyone. But yes, there might be a calibration in terms of when it is an early business. I think the resources are much more available in the form of time and brains, not in the form of money. So what is more available, you generally consume more because that's the only option you have. And companies grow, probably you have lesser time and more money. So if you ask founders to do certain things, they tend to hire a person that, why I'll do this. Let's hire someone who will do this. So I think the natural costing comes into the picture somewhere, I don't know when, but somewhere during the journey. And that has to be the pretty much market driven and a culture driven. Sometimes it's not about market also. You really wants to make your company run in a certain way. Infosys runs very differently from Google. But that's a true representation of the culture and market conditions and the skill set. So I think it's a difficult one, but that has to be understood and solved. That's the only answer. If it is not solved, you are still not transition. In Indian ecosystem, generally a Series A startup should start with 10%. And then what happens is gets diluted but gets refilled again. And depending upon the need of hiring, like if you're 3 co-founders, probably you hire less people than 2. If 1, you will hire more. It gets through an adjustments. But my view on this is, even in the listed companies, let's take a HDFC Bank. How much ESOP a CEO gets? The ESOP is very universal, but morely people are discussing in the context of startups. It's not true. Actually, the Google gives ESOP even today. And how much money Sundar Pichai makes is through ESOPs only. He's the CEO. And there's so many CXOs who are on an ESOP pool. The ESOP pool creation is rewarding your executives through a currency which is linked with the overall shareholder wealth. It is actually a currency. It is same as cash. Cash is absolute. Like cash can have a conflicting situation, then you take cash out and share price is going down. So at least your OKRs, your KPIs are linked with the share price of the company. That's the only purpose I think the ESOP solves. Otherwise, ESOP is legally also is a cost. You need to report it in the cost, and it's money.
Just enables you to attract high quality talent.
Absolutely. And both ways. Because they'll make money through ESOPs only when the company share price has gone up. That means they've created value. So it's actually the value sharing versus absolute value extraction from the company. ESOP is fundamentally a value sharing with the colleagues. So that's, I think, the right way. And this is done. I was reading newly revised comp structure of Infosys CEO this year with their appraisal. The majority part of RSU is in ESOP. That's a phenomenal example of corporate governance in listed company. Most of the reason being is if CEO gets that compensation, probably the company is really doing good for all other shareholders. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you. As I said, see, there's no definite answer. We have seen companies where somebody is running a company for 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. There are cases where I think early example would be, probably the good example would be Google itself. Larry Page and Sergey Brin are not old. They are 40s. But the company is being run by Sundar. So in India also there are examples. Flipkart founders are not Flipkart. Flipkart is a well-run company. Like, there's no fixed time, honestly, when this has to be done. But one thing is sure, if you realize that you become a bottleneck and you started really thinking one of these 5 things in your mind, back of the mind, actually you're adding negative value to your own company. So slowly let it go and move it to the next phase is a wise call. Thank you.
Or
Thanks.
any other
Thank you.
questions? That's it.
Moving away from this topic,
Yeah.
I just thought of, you could share your experience as a founder of
That would be phenomenal. I think to try to solve the most difficult problem of, interior space predictability in delivery.
Thank you so much. So I think, see, being a founder in any company, I'll tell you one thing. No business is easy. Especially, especially creating value in Indian ecosystem. And I'm adding the word Indian ecosystem because this system actually, you know, needs three fools to come together. One is a founder. Second is somebody who puts in money to that unknown thing. And third are the consumers who are going to trust something you are creating now. India actually doesn't need any of these three fundamentally in a different context. But then there is a belief that we'll be able to disrupt something which exists. And so far, I think 100 plus unicorns, maybe 1,000 plus companies, I don't know the exact number, 100 million plus. So we are able to create some value somewhere through these disruptive hustling, getting money nationally or internationally, or finding those, actually you need these three things, and finding some customers who started believing on Livspace, Ola, Swiggy. At least they had a trust that I'll pay hard-earned money to this newly funded company. So you actually start getting these three things together and it starts showing in the form of business. But from my personal experience, it's a cyclic problem. I think lots of things has to be proven in Indian ecosystem before you can take consumers' money. Although what has changed is the most important ingredient is, other than the founders themselves, we are able to find people who are believers on these startup ideas. Probably all of us hearing this thing itself proves that there is some degree of interest in the new ideas as there in the new college graduates, professionals. So as part of early days of Mintra, at that time, actually the biggest question was why a top talent will join in a startup. Now there are people who are willing to join your journey and they are smarter than you, willing to work hard. So I think one problem is clearly solved. Then the capital markets are really following the Indian growth story, which essentially means this is the country which is going to deliver 8-10% year on growth globally. Very few economies can do that. That's a very macro thing. And then the last is the micro. What problem you are solving and really the consumers will pay for it. Some things are coming along, but I'll still say the journey is difficult in general. And this is an outcome of probably on an absolute basis, we say we are 100,000 companies or 10,000 companies, but out of more than 1 billion population. So, and those are 200 only. So it's actually the I'd say not an easy journey, but at the same time it's doable. Why? Because the one thing is 100% solved, which is availability of people joining you. So you're not alone in this. There are enough people who are willing to work without salary, less salary, leave their established careers, and join hands. That's the biggest support. Then, if you are really solving a problem, I think the financial markets are maturing and take a risk. And third is ultimately that is what you're solving, a problem for somebody. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. So, on behalf of THub, we present you a small memento.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you so much.